This is Larry Harnish with a look at how to read an article on the Black Dahlia case, how to be a careful, critical reader, what to look for, and how to spot red flags. At the end, I'll talk about a few resources where you can safely research the Black Dahlia case and at least hope to get the basic facts right. I'm using a recent article by Christina Coulter at Oxygen, written for the upcoming anniversary of Elizabeth Short's murder on January 15th. But it could be any article. Writers generally make the same mistakes. And why do they do that? The reason they make these mistakes is because they follow the model of the middle school term paper. Assume that your secondary sources are somehow accurate, run them through a blender, voila, term paper. Now, with many subjects, this approach works okay. Like if you're writing about the construction of Hoover Dam, fine. But with the Black Dahlia case, it is garbage out, and it is really garbage out. The result is that even when writers try to be accurate, the Black Dahlia case can be more folklore than reality. And with that, let's go to the article in question. Here is Oxygen True Crime, Christina Coulter's article. Christina Coulter is apparently a regular writer for Oxygen who has done a number of stories. Oxygen tends to do anniversary stories on the Black Dahlia case. So this is a new one. They've done at least one other one. So let's go through the article and see how many mistakes we can find and how they got made. Okay, who is the Black Dahlia murder victim, Elizabeth Short? Well, so far we're right. Okay. More than 500 people have confessed. I don't know if that number is true. It sounds high. A lot of people did confess, but I would be very leery of that. Many people. Okay. The murder of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, found nude and bisected in a vacant LA lot in 1947. So far, that's true, but none of their stories have been deemed credible. Of course, we have an agreement problem. It's none has. Okay, can you tell I was a copy editor? Yeah. LAPD detectives still receive tips in the 76-year-old case that gripped the nation. Yeah, okay. So far we're good. For those some accounts of Black Dahlia murder victim Elizabeth Short, and then it links to another article, painted her as an expiring actress. She had no acting jobs during her short life. That's also true. But the 1947 discovery of her gruesomely posed corpse in a vacant lot, stripped of clothing, generally people who are nude have been stripped of clothing, split in two, yeah, she was cut in half, sparked decades of investigation, speculation, and adaptations of her story in film, TV series, and literature. Okay, so far we're good. The 22-year-old Boston native had worked as a waitress before the discovery of her body in the Leimert Park neighborhood of South Los Angeles on January 15th of that year. Okay, again, yes, she had worked as a waitress at one point. That is, so far we're doing okay. It was in Leimert Park, that is true. Her torso resting a foot away from her lower half. It was maybe about a foot. The day after her body was found, the Los Angeles Examiner sold more Okay, here's our first lie. This is from this is a Will Fowler lie right here. The day after her body was found, the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper sold more copies than any other day in his newspaper except for VJ Day. That is a Will Fowler lie. He told that story to me. It was one of his many stories that involved him being at the crime scene and all that kind of stuff. He was sort of he showed up at the very end. Will claimed that he was the first reporter there and left and then came back to fool a competition. Nah, none of that's true. Will Fowler was just lied about everything. There's something about the Black Dahlia case that inspires people to lie. And one of them was Will Fowler. Now, this is pretty funny. The Los Angeles Record ran front page stories on her murder investigation for 31 consecutive days, according to The Guardian. Now, to Christina's credit, she credits a source for that. She says, oh, it's from The Guardian. Now, reality check, the LA Record had been dead for decades by the time 1947 rolled around. The LA Record was a little nothing paper. It folded, I think, during the early Depression. So, but let's go to the Guardian. Let's check and see. Let's check and see what she's got. Oh, look, it's the Guardian, all right. No, we're not doing that. I know it's a Steve Hodel story. I know who killed my father. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, so let's go here. Let's see, the Record here. And here we have it. The Los Angeles Record carried related items on its front page. Now, this is unsourced. We don't know where the Guardian got it, but it isn't true because it's not true because the Record is long dead. It was front page news often on all of the LA papers except for the LA Times, which was very squeamish about murder and indelicate things like that. There was only twice in the entire history of the paper that it had a Black Dahlia story on the front page. Once when a guy named Joseph Dumais confessed to it, and they thought for a day maybe he did it. And then my story in 1997. That's it. Otherwise, no. So this is a wrong. Now, part of the decades-long intrigue came from the brutality of the killing. Well, that's true. Betty Bersinger, who discovered Short's corpse on Norton Avenue while pushing her 2-year-old in a stroller, first thought she was looking at a discarded mannequin. That is kind of sort of true. At least I did interview Betty Bersinger. I think her daughter was a little bit older than that, but yes, basically that's true. Washed and drained Short's body was washed and drained of blood. Yes, that is also true. The state of the body. Now, this is interesting. Its entrails neatly tucked under its buttocks and its uterus expertly removed. Okay, no. I don't think the entrails weren't neatly tucked. It's just how the body landed. The uterus was not expertly removed. You hear a lot of this. I've heard James Elroy say, "Oh yeah, her ovaries were switched." I was like, "What? What? No. Her body was intact. In that sense, nothing was missing. But profilers to believe that the perpetrator was a surgeon or a physician, according to FBI records. Okay, let's go to the FBI records. Here's the link. What do we have? Okay, here's FBI records, all right. But notice, this page does not say anything about a physician or surgeon being involved. It is just how the examiner helped the FBI. No, wait a second, I take that back. It's about Red Manley, whether the Bureau had any information on Red Manley. Okay, and the Bureau was in no position to comment on this matter, and that it was a matter of local jurisdiction. The Bureau must be most hesitant in inserting itself into such a matter. Okay, so this has nothing at all to do, zero to do, with whether Elizabeth Short was bisected by a surgeon. No, that's totally wrong. This is just a random link to the FBI. The maiming of her face, an eerie grin, her mouth cut at the edges, suggested to investigators that the killer may have known her personally. Yeah, I got that from John Douglas. John Douglas told me that in doing his profile. Near the scene, investigators with the LAPD found a single heel print amidst a tangle of tire tracks and a cement sack containing watery blood. Yeah, kind of sort of true. I think they found a tire track and a heel print and one drop of blood. The newspapers reported that there were cement sacks in the vicinity. And that's all I'll say about that. The Black Dahlia, so named by news outlets. Okay, this is something that absolutely everyone gets wrong. They cannot resist saying that the newspapers named the case. It is true. The newspapers frequently named crimes. And that continued well after the Black Dahlia case, up into the Night Stalker, the Hillside Strangler, all of that stuff. It was generally the Herald Examiner that did that in later years. Originally, the Herald Express tried to nickname the case the Werewolf Murder, but the name did not stick. Elizabeth Short was jokingly called the Black Dahlia at a drugstore in Long Beach. So she was called the Black Dahlia in that drugstore in Long Beach during her life. Okay. So no, not nicknamed by the papers. It was based on the Blue Dahlia, the film noir, the Blue Dahlia. Okay. Identified by fingerprints, underage drinking in Santa Barbara. That's true. The FBI was able to identify her just 56 minutes using now new Soundphoto technology. Okay, that's kind of garbled. What really happened is newspapers had a thing called Soundphoto. It was for transmitting photographs across the country for publication in newspapers. What happened was the detectives had an artist's sketch of the victim because she was a Jane Doe. And in conversation, they said, hey, maybe you can send her fingerprints back to Washington by the Soundphoto rather than sending them by airmail, which is how they would have done it otherwise. It was very difficult to get good enough quality to transmit them. But once they were successfully transmitted, then yeah, she was identified in a very brief time once they got the fingerprints. Let's see. Autopsy, January, ligature marks, chunk slice from her breasts and thighs. Cause of death was a brain hemorrhage, a detail that police and the Bureau kept from news outlets to weed false confessions. Well, you know, as I just said, and as that document that this very article links to, don't insert it yourself in this case. It's a local matter. And so the Bureau had nothing to do with that. It was public information in the inquest. Shock and hemorrhage due to loss of blood. That's what she died of. Information was kept back. Those are key questions, but that wasn't it. This wasn't it. Although more than 500 men and women have taken credit for the ghastly killing, I don't know if it's 500. None of those admissions led to an arrest, according to the Los Angeles Times. Okay, what do we have here? Why, it's an article by Miles Corwin about OJ. So he's talking about that. And let's see. Where does... Right. Okay. So here's where Miles says 500. Okay. So that's the source on all the stuff about the confessions. Okay. Now, this is interesting. A Los Angeles Police Department flyer asking for information on Elizabeth Short FBI photo. I'm not sure that's in the FBI file. I haven't looked at the FBI file in a while because there's a lot of misleading information in it. It's not necessarily, you have to be very careful with the FBI file. This image, this flyer is all over the place. You can buy them on eBay. I bought one on eBay years and years ago. Okay, the Examiner contacted Short's mother, Phoebe, and told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest, according to the BBC. Okay, let's go to the BBC article and see what they've got. Hint, the Brits are horrible with true crime. They will say absolutely anything. British crime publications are the worst. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. So here's the BBC article. Loading. Is this going to, I think this is another Steve Hodel story. Let's see. Black Dahlia, published in January 2017. It's another anniversary story. Okay. As the 70th anniversary approaches, okay, it's another anniversary story. James Bartlett, okay. And here's the scene setter. It's got to be at the Biltmore. And then we get into Betty Bersinger finding the body. It's the mannequin. Okay, now this is what's amusing. Okay, right here. Yeah. Short had been cut into neatly at the waist. That's true. Short had been cut neatly into at the waist, drained of blood. That is true. She had been mutilated. That is true. Intestines removed. No, false, wrong. And her mouth slashed from ear to ear, a gruesome cut known as a Glasgow smile. Now, let me point out that Glasgow smile, which everybody applies to the Black Dahlia case, that's from Wikipedia. Somebody years ago threw in the term Glasgow smile to the Wikipedia article on the Black Dahlia. And since then, it has just become embedded in the story. The Glasgow smile wasn't called that it didn't exist in 1947, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, this is a more recent term. It is, again, why you have to be so careful with your research. You've got to stay out of Wikipedia. Now, what's interesting is they talked to Glenn Martin, who was at that time the head of the Los Angeles Police Museum. He is now affiliated with the Sheriff's Department Museum in the Hall of Justice. She lived, okay, this is wrong. She lived in Hollywood. She had aspirations to be an actor. No, this is, no. This is all wrong. So that's enough of that. Okay. I could go on and beat up the BBC some more, but you get the general idea. Again, as a general rule, anything the Brits write about true crime is just run away from it. It's just incredibly unreliable. That's true. Only after prying personal information about the victim did they tell Phoebe that her daughter had been murdered. Yeah, that's true. The Examiner and the Los Angeles Herald Express sensationalized the case through the days following her identification. Said she had describing the tailored suit. Not really a tailored suit. No, not really. She actually had borrowed a coat from a roommate because she didn't have one. So that isn't true either. One of her roommates did say she liked to prowl Hollywood Boulevard. That part is true. Not much is definitively known about Short. In childhood, she suffered severe bronchitis, asthma attacks, underwent lung surgery at 15. She moved to California from Medford, Mass in 1942 when she was 18 to live with her father. That's kind of sort of true, but it's dropping out a lot. Elizabeth Short went to Florida, and she went to Florida in the winters because the Massachusetts winters were pretty tough for her. So she went to Florida. So she was going between Massachusetts and Florida generally. And then there was one little detour where she came out to California, lived very briefly with her dad in Vallejo, California, where he was working at Mare Island Navy Base. And then they came down to Los Angeles. They had been fighting. They didn't get along. And she took off immediately and went up the coast to Camp Cook. So she, and this is sort of right. She was arrested for underage drinking at a local bar. That is true. Juvenile authorities sent her back to Massachusetts. But yeah, she went back to Florida, then back to Los Angeles in 1946. She was engaged to Air Force Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr. before he died in a plane crash during World War II in 1945. That is all true. Short spent the subsequent summer doing model jobs and building her portfolio. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. She did say she'd been doing some modeling, but whether she was actually doing any of it is really unclear. At the time of her death, she was renting a room behind a nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. Okay, no, she wasn't. Elizabeth Short had no known address when she was killed. She had been living at Mark Hansen's house. She got thrown out of there twice. Second time she went to a place on Cherokee called the Chancellor. She had a room with a bunch of roommates, but she left there to go down to San Diego for a month and came up from San Diego in January of 1947 and then was dropped off at the Biltmore and never seen again. Regardless of what Steve Hodel and other people say about her so-called lost weight, yeah, nobody knows where the heck she went. Okay, so this is not true either. In the frenzy following her killing, news outlets went on to make a host of unsubstantiated claims about Short's character, according to the Portland Tribune. Now, this is a dead link. This is link rot. But luckily for you, I have the actual story. And what it is my friend, and I like Mary Pacios. It's a 2006 interview with Mary Pacios. It's a terrible thing to learn from a TV news flash that someone you care about has died. 12-year-old Mary Pacios was babysitting and watching a cowboy movie one winter night in 1947 when she first heard that her friend Elizabeth Short had been murdered. Okay. Now, Mary has told me the same story, that she was watching television. Let me remind everybody, this is 1947, okay? Television does not exist as we know it. She most certainly was not watching a cowboy movie on television. But let's go to here are the radio listings for January 15th, 1947. Notice, radio. Okay, there is no TV listings at all. In 1947, television was essentially an experimental system. There was TV like in New York, a little bit of experimental in Los Angeles, and that's it. And I'm not going to bother with the rest of the article. As I said, I consider Mary a friend, but she's told me the same story, and it's like, no, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. You didn't see it on television because television didn't exist. Now, this is interesting. After Short's stripper acquaintance told police that she liked to get guys worked up over her, but then she'd leave them hanging dry. I've never heard that quote. I don't know where that was from. I certainly don't know of any of Elizabeth Short's roommates or acquaintances who are strippers. You know, it's like, where in the heck did that come? Even I don't know where that came from. Reporters scoured LA gay bars for any clues surrounding her killing. So, you know, how does that work? Anyway, I don't even know where that's from. Okay, we're going to get down. Postal worker found a suspicious package with words that had been cut from newspaper clippings. Okay, this was not a package, it's an envelope. There it is. It's not a package. It's an envelope. There's a picture of it. Okay. Now she says the name Mark Hansen on the cover. Okay. Mark Hansen was a wealthy nightclub and theater owner, according to reporting by Rolling Stone. Yeah. I'm not really sure how wealthy Mark Hansen was. I think he was doing okay. He was a sort of silent partner in the Florentine Gardens, and he owned some movie theaters, but he wasn't running them. He had another company running his movie theaters. So, I mean, he was doing some of that, but not a lot. Anyway, an acquaintance of Short, he had reportedly allowed her and her friends to stay over at his apartment. Well, no, it was a house. It wasn't an apartment, you know. But yes, okay, Mark Hansen was cleared. Yes, that's true. The LAPD interviewed more than 150 male suspects in the killing. Could be. They interviewed a lot of people. Robert Red Manley was interviewed. Now, this is interesting. Kathy Scott's The Crime Book. What in the hell is that? Is that anything reliable? Kathy Scott's The Crime Book? Let me just put it this way. All of the supermarket anthologies on true crime, you just run away from those things. They're written for a quick buck, and that's it. It's all secondary research. Just stay away from that stuff. Now, Notice, he was cleared of suspicion by several polygraph tests. Okay. Did he take polygraph tests? Yes. Now, polygraph tests aren't admissible in court for a good reason. And in 1947, the polygraph was extremely primitive. When you see him hooked up to these instruments, it's like, oh dear. So, nah. Okay. That afternoon, where are we talking about? January 9th, January 9th. That afternoon, he dropped short off at the Biltmore. Okay, again, no. What really happened was he drove Elizabeth Short back from San Diego, and she wanted him to just leave her at the bus station, which was at I think it's at 6th and Los Angeles Streets. It's gone now. And he said, "No, it's a rotten neighborhood. I don't want to leave you there." So they checked her luggage, and then he took her to the Biltmore. Elizabeth Short had this story about how she was going to meet her sister there. Well, not really, but that's what she told him. And so he went around the lobby looking for Elizabeth Short's sister, Virginia, didn't find her. Elizabeth Short, meanwhile, retreated to the ladies' room, knowing damn well that her sister wasn't there and was never going to be there. And so he finally took off. He said, I've got to get home. I think he left her there about 6:30 that evening. And then they don't really know. Later on, they said, oh, yeah, I think we saw her making some phone calls. We think we saw her do this. We think we saw her do that. And then we get into the letters, okay? And there's a lot of prank letters that were sent to the newspapers and to the police. Steve Hodel has made a big thing about Black Dahlia Avenger, but it's like, no. no. Anyway, so from there, the Los Angeles Daily News, the investigation hit a stone wall. The LAPD issued a warrant to the University of Southern California Medical School. Yeah, I guess they don't have copy editors at Oxygen or spell check. Okay, and then we get into a suicide note, blah, blah, blah. Okay, City Councilman Lloyd Davis posted a reward for information. It later turned out that the city at that point didn't have legal jurisdiction to offer rewards for crime, so rewards for information, so they changed that. Yeah, this is all these bogus confessions and stuff. On and on and on. Yeah. And so then we get into True Confessions, Elroy's Black Dahlia, not turned into a movie. Who is the Black Dahlia? 1975. Former LAPD officer Steve Hodel spent the last 15 years. No, it's the last 20 years now. Black Dahlia Avenger came out in 2003. Evidence he believes implicates his own father, George Hodel, according to The Guardian, which is again, is this article. Okay, now we're not going to bother with that. He served with the LAPD for 23 years, establishing himself as an unfaltering homicide detective. No, he established himself as an okay detective with a drinking problem. That was Steve Hodel's reputation within the LAPD, as told to me by his fellow homicide detectives. That's what they said. Okay detective with a drinking problem. His theory regarding the Black Dahlia case has not been confirmed by investigators. Now that's interesting. Usually writers go whole hog on, George Hodel, jet set serial killer. Yeah, Hodel's investigation reportedly began after he found a photograph resembling Elizabeth Short among his father's things. Yeah, well, that's what he said. Numerous other books have been written about claiming to know Short's killer. A woman named Janice Knowlton believed that her father killed the woman in 1947, according to the Los Angeles Times. Now, that is the obituary on Janice Knowlton, who committed suicide. She used to call me all the time about conveniently dead people molesting her when she was a kid. And then that's the end of it. Okay, so we're done. Okay, so those are some of the pitfalls in writing about the Black Dahlia case. That's only a few. Now, this could be any story. The writers tend to do the same kind of thing. Okay, so where do you look? Because people ask me, where do I do research to write about the Black Dahlia case? Oh, okay, first of all, not here. Don't read in this book. This is junk, okay? Don't read in that one. Okay, how about this one? No, it's more junk. Don't read that. How about this? Will Fowler's Reporters. This is the one where Will says he was the first one on the crime scene and all that kind of stuff. No, definitely not. It's full of lies. Not this one. Not this one. And not this one. None of these books. They're all terrible. Don't read them or your mind will explode. Oh, how about this one? It's called Black Dahlia Files. Isn't it accurate? No, it's not. It's mostly made up. Donald Wolfe, before he died, earned a lifetime ban from the district attorney's office because he fabricated a document. A terrible piece of. And finally, this one. No, this one is full of mistakes. It can't even get the date of the murder right. And there's a couple I'm not showing. The first one being Daddy is the Black Dahlia Killer, which is a book I won't even let in the house. And then P.U. Eatwell's Black Dahlia Red Rose, which again, I will not even allow that book in the house. It's not worth looking. Okay, so none of the books. Oh dear, what am I going to do with my middle school term paper if I can't use any of the books? How about the magazine articles? Now you can't use those either. Because why? Because they're based on the books. Even seemingly authoritative books like Cases That Haunt Us by John Douglas. Okay, why can't you use that? Because it's all based on Severed, which is by the late John Gilmore, 25% mistakes and 50% fiction. So, okay, as I have demonstrated, the newspaper articles are questionable. The books are all terrible. What about the websites? Okay, very quickly. Wikipedia, no. Wikipedia is just, it's groupthink, it's folklore, stay away from it. What about Black Dahlia in Hollywood? Oh boy. Black Dahlia in Hollywood is, it's kind of like amateur genealogists trying to work the family tree back to English royalty. I mean, sometimes they get things right, a lot of things they get wrong, and even when they have stuff right, they can't connect the dots. It's just the best thing you can do is stay away from it. And there are other websites. There is one that has an edu end on it, so people think it's reliable. It's just another middle school term paper full of mistakes. There is one website, Black Dahlia Info Solution something.org. Stay the hell away from that because it is the worst, craziest crackpot stuff you can imagine. The only interesting thing about it is that Steve Hodel ripped off this crazy guy who wrote to me under a pseudonym. He called himself Jack Pico. He had the idea that Elizabeth Short's body, stop me if this sounds familiar, he had the idea that Elizabeth Short's body was left on Norton Avenue as a pointer to Degnan, referring to the murder of Suzanne Degnan the year before. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, because Steve Hodel absolutely stole that idea from this guy. And no, it doesn't make any sense at all. So absolutely, you know, stay out of that website simply because you can't tell what's right and what's wrong. Okay, so fine, Larry, you told me all the places that I can't look. Where do I look? Okay, this is what I always tell people. Start with the original newspaper stories from 1947, like the day of the murder, January 15th, up to about, you know, into February. February 10th, you'll run into the killing of Jean French. So, and that will kind of crowd things out. But, you know, the first month or so, maybe into like March, of the local papers, which is the Los Angeles papers. If you don't have access to that, you can read the wire service stories, Associated Press, International News Service, United Press. Some of those wire services picked up the local stories. So that they are somewhat reliable. If you don't have a subscription to newspapers.com, your local public library probably has some sort of free online subscription to, you can dig through some sort of newspaper archives. Again, try to stick to the Los Angeles papers if you can, because the further you get away from Los Angeles, the more opportunity there is for mistakes. Also online, and I hesitate to mention this, if you go to the FBI file, you will find newspaper articles in there. It's online. There are newspaper articles in there, but I caution you strongly, if you go to the FBI file, only read the newspaper stories. Don't read anything else. Don't read any of the reports. Don't read any of the memos. At this point, you don't know enough to be able to evaluate what's accurate and what is not, because believe me, people in 1947 lied just as much as they do now. There is one account in there of a romantic interlude with Elizabeth Short. That's totally fake. Didn't happen. And I'm not going to say any more than that. It was the basis for this French graphic novel, which is just, I'm not even going to discuss it. It's just, no. Anyway, that's what I would recommend doing. The original newspaper stories and the FBI file, but only the newspaper stories, nothing that, and that's it. And that will give you a somewhat solid basis for what happened. But stay out of everything written after about 1950. And that's it. Okay, there you have it. Have a great day. And reminder, if you want to remember Elizabeth Short on the anniversary of her death, trim your roses. Trim your roses. Okay. And with that, Larry Harnish is out.